Well, what is health? Well, health, if it's not the absence or not only the absence of disease, what is it the result of? Our health, is what my research has shown, is a result of our body's hardwired health defense systems that we're born with. They formed in the womb. When we were developing in the uterus, we were forming these health defense systems that stay with us from the time we're born to our very last breath.
You're somebody who has incredible insight into the big thing on people's minds right now. Obviously, our world has really been turned upside down, but a lot of folks don't really understand what's happening in the body. As a matter of fact, a lot of people on the front lines, a lot of researchers don't understand what's happening in the body. So first and foremost, I want to ask you, what's actually happening in the body with severe COVID infections? And on top of that, which I really think they connect, why are issues like diabetes and obesity increasing the susceptibility to COVID so much? How is all this tied together?
Well, Shawn, you and I kind of start from the same plane, which is that we were all working on how do you stay healthy and how do you get healthy long before this pandemic hit. And so, a year ago when we got blindsided by this whole thing, and I'm talking, when I say we, I'm talking about humans living on planet Earth. Nobody expected it to happen when it actually happened. One of the things that actually, I think that, you and I shared offline is that, those of us who actually are engaged in understanding health dove right into the data as it was unfolding to try to understand, why are we getting sick to begin with? I mean, the planet is filled with viruses. We don't normally get this sick. Like, we're not scared of viruses normally. We get a flu or a cold, not a big deal. But what was so special about this? And so, I'm a physician, internal medicine doc, and also a research scientist. And that's what led me to start thinking about health and diet and lifestyle. But, first and foremost, when I'm actually confronted with disease, I kind of go back to my wheelhouse to say, what's the physiology? What's the biology? What's the mechanisms of what's going on? And I'll tell you as a doctor, something that was really bizarre in March 2020, like when I watched the whole world kind of start to seemingly implode. Emergency rooms were filled, ICUs were overloaded, bodies were building up. And the thing that was really odd was that the coronavirus was supposed to be a respiratory virus. You breathe it in. But there was a lot more going on than having the lungs get filled up with fluid and inflammation. That is a big problem by itself, but you started seeing all these other bizarre things. People were having strokes. People were actually having smell problems. Their hearts were having issues. They, in addition to their lungs, I even saw kidney problems, and even the toe would turn beefy red. That is not your typical garden variety virus. Not even a serious virus was doing this. And so, one of the things that I dove into, literally into the deep end of the pool as a researcher, is to try to figure out what was going on. So I wound up, this is what medical researchers are able to do. I wound up getting autopsy tissue from people who died of severe COVID. Most people are running away from the burning house. I ran into it to try to get the tissue. And then we were able to actually put some very sophisticated research techniques to look at what was actually happening in the body, right? When you and I have always talked about health, we're saying it's not just about your lifestyle and your diet. It's actually how your body responds. That's the physiology. The clues are in there. And so what we found was really astounding. Not only did I look in the lung and find inflammation and infection, but I saw the coronavirus invading the circulation, the blood vessels, the vascular cells making up blood vessels in the lung. And as the infection was hitting the blood vessels, you can imagine what could happen. Our blood vessels have to be slippery like an ice skating rink to allow all those blood cells to keep cruising through, delivering oxygen and nutrients to every cell in our body. And once those blood vessel cells are infected, the blood vessel itself starts to be damaged. And what I, have once described as a smooth ice skating rink, right? After the Zamboni cleans up that ice, you could throw a sweater on the ice and go all the way across the rink. Once after a game, hockey game going on, you can barely skate on the ice at all. It's like clumpy, right? And that's what was happening inside these lungs we saw in people who had acute severe COVID, that you couldn't actually get blood to actually flow through this. It was getting caught up, it was clotting, and these little microclots in the microvessels were happening everywhere. And suddenly there was an explanation, at least one ray of light that we started defining. And that's what was happening in the brain, in the toe, in the heart, and other areas. And so we published this in the New England Journal of Medicine to try to explain, at least one layer of this onion peeled back. And I'll tell you, we are still peeling layers back from this onion.
Yeah, this is fascinating. So this is really what we're thinking about, is that this virus has a tropism towards the lung tissue, but it's not just the typical things you would think as far as like a respiratory, cough, that kind of thing, fluid, but this is translating over into the capillaries. We're talking about our circulatory system is really what's causing all of these kind of downstream effects that, and just even that in of itself is, I think, really contrary to what people are thinking about. So and how does the endothelium really play into this situation when we're talking about folks with pre-existing conditions like diabetes, for example? Maybe this is starting to explain why diabetes and obesity makes you so susceptible.
Yeah, it's a great point. And again, it's an area that, as a researcher, I'm still working on. So we knew very early on that if you were an older person, or if you were obese, or if you had diabetes, they call it diabesity sometimes because they go hand in hand often. Why were these people more vulnerable? Now, they're not the only people that get COVID, but they were more vulnerable, especially at the beginning. And it turns out, if you correlate what we found in the blood vessels, the infection goes into the blood vessels, and even if you're super healthy, that will put you at risk. But we do know when you get older, and if you have diabetes, and if you are morbidly obese, your endothelium, the cells lining the blood vessels, are especially sensitive and not functioning really well. In fact, we call it endothelial is actually the name of the cell. The endothelium are the cells lining the blood vessels. But in diabetes, obesity, and in aging, we tend to see endothelial dysfunction. So you've heard of erectile dysfunction, right? So everybody understands that. Endothelial dysfunction is that your blood vessels can't get it up. And so basically what happens now is that your blood vessels can't get good blood flow going. And now if you add a virus infection on top of that destroys and damages that endothelium, you're in big trouble. So we think this is why the people with diabetes, even pre-diabetes, who are overweight or obese and older, are particularly vulnerable. It's not the only reason, but it's clearly one of the smoking guns.
This is incredible. So, and of course, this is why I'm so excited, because not only do you understand some of the root cause, like really looking at what's happening with our biology, but also looking at how we can, in no better terms, what are the nutrients and foods involved to basically provide some Viagra for our endothelium. So we're going to get into that in a moment, but I really want to dive a little bit deeper here, because I think first and foremost, especially talking with someone like yourself, there's a lot of points of contact with viruses. Like you mentioned, we have more virus particles on planet Earth than literally anything else. We're just swimming in virus particles, but we're constantly interacting with them and even sampling them. And I think that, especially when you see a lot of folks who don't have symptoms, or, maybe they don't even take the infection on, like, how is that happening? And I think there's one of those inception points, or interception points, should I say, kind of like Deion Sanders coming in and blocking the reception of the virus interacting with your cells, is our nose, for example. And so can we talk a little bit about that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, so even though viruses are too small for us to see, we are literally, when we step outside of our house or even in our houses, we are actually walking through clouds of viruses. And viruses are also inside our body. And just like bacteria, we've got good bacteria, we've got bad bacteria. There's viruses that are actually not harming us and probably helping us. In fact, the term microbiome, everybody thinks about good bacteria and bad bacteria, but there's also a microvirome that lives inside us as well. We basically don't understand it, but My guess is that, we depend on viruses that can, continuously interact with our bodies, trigger interactions that actually help, frankly, stimulate our health is probably the way it goes. And there may be even um, interactions or reactions by the viruses that live in a harmless way inside us that might actually even benefit the body. So I think all this, there's like a black box ahead of us that this pandemic has now opened our eyes to. We need to look into it. We always think about, like the bad guys, but, I tend to think about like, well, what are the good guys doing too? If you had more good guys than bad guys, you tend to have an orderly society.
And what makes bad guys go bad as
Exactly.
well. You know, there's usually a story behind it. So in talking about this point specifically, that it's kind of like, I think a good analogy would be our bodies quote sampling a virus or bacteria from the environment, and it's happening with our points of contact, being our skin, our nose, but primarily I think our respiratory organs, especially those kind of front-facing parts, so our mouth and our nose. So is there a potential for example, having healthy sinuses or just healthy functioning of the nose, for example, playing a role in stopping an infection in the first place? Like, why are some people not getting infected?
Yeah. Well, so, I think that this sampling and ballet, maybe it's more of a tango that goes on at the interface between the air we breathe in and our body is being monitored, moderated, emceed by our immune system, right? And even though everybody talks about the immune system, I think one of the things we've learned from this pandemic is that our immune system is much more complicated than we ever thought. And so, what I've been trying to explain to people is that our immune system is like an army of super soldiers. And like soldiers, every group within these armed forces have their own weapons, their own skill set, their own fighting skill set, and they report their own commanders. At the end of the day, the different branches, Army, Navy, Marines, and then the subgroups, the SEALs, the Rangers, they all, at the end of the day, are all fighting on the same team, and that's team me or team you, a team body, right? So what's happening is that when we actually have good sentries, these are the guards that are just sitting there waiting to, with binoculars, like our immune system, in our noses, in our mouths. And by the way, I want to also point out, because I do research in the eye, when our eyes are open, we got a lot of sensing going on right by the skin, the conjunctiva. We tend to think about the eyes just receiving light, but it's also sensing the atmosphere around us, which is why when there's a lot of pollen, you rub your eyes. And so there's all kinds of sensors right face forward, exactly what you're talking about. And we've got antibodies and we've got immune cells, our innate immunity that's sitting right there, the front gates. This is the front gate of our defenses are one of the intermediators, the guard, the sentry that actually samples who's come to the gate and decides if they like them or not. Let me see your passport, right? And so passport control, our TSA, Homeland Security of the body, actually is that very front gate. Now, when we talk about the super soldiers, if once you let, it's kind of like going through passport control. Once you go through your passport, you keep on going. There's still more cops on the other side. There's still more security on the other side checking you out, making sure you're doing all the right things. And I think that's what also happening in the body is that most of the bad viruses and bacteria are held at bay, no entry, banned. Okay, or we got to take you off to the side and tackle you, and that's basically how this front gate innate immune system works. Our antibodies, we've got IgA, immunoglobulin A, which is one of the different types of antibodies our body makes. They're nonspecific. They are just sitting there, armed and ready to take down a virus or a bacteria that might be coming up, and they just are looking for any kind of bad guys that need to stay out of the body.
I love that so much. So we want a good security system, of course. And I love that you pointed this. That's such a great analogy. of having the different pieces of the armed forces, one of those being that front facing portion, one of those being where, today we know the vast majority of our immune system is hanging out in our gut and our gastrointestinal tract, for example. That's another point of contact and work. And so definitely we're going to talk more about that. But I just want to reiterate this again, because we're experiencing something incredibly challenging right now, but this isn't the last thing. We're continuously going to be exposed to novel viruses, novel strains of bacteria. And ultimately, of course, the place that we're really trying to get to today, and why I'm having Dr. Leon is so excited about this, is getting our citizens more resilient for what is definitely imminent. And so just to reiterate this point again, you mentioned we have this virome, this microbiome, the human virome. We have over 400 trillion viruses in and on our bodies right now. And some of them are pathogenic, like they can make us sick. But also, again, this got me back into the data early on, looking at the human genome itself, when that was mapped out and all the surprises that came from that. We just thought we would have so many different genes, especially like compared to, flies and things like that. But we come to find out we've got like 20,000-ish genes that we're all sharing, but we have this dramatically incredible array of epigenetic influences that can change what our genes do so much, making us so different in our appearance, making us so different in our performance and our health. And one of those big pieces I saw in the Human Genome Project, 8% of the human genome itself is endogenous retroviruses. So when Dr. Lee is stating the fact that this is a part of us, that in some ways viruses help us, but in other ways, we do have these experiences of having new things that we have to adapt to, and we need to get ourselves to a better place for us to adapt. So with this said, I want to talk about this intersection point of the gut and our food and how that might play a part in our susceptibility. And specifically, you talk about something in your incredible book, New York Times bestseller, Eat to Beat Disease, the body's defense systems. So can you talk about what that is, the body's defense systems, the body's health defense systems, and how activating these systems can really help in situations like this and everything else in our lives that we're challenged with?
Yeah, you're so right, Shawn. This isn't the first mass illness that we have to deal with. There's others coming. But even before we were even talking about coronaviruses, we were talking about cancer, heart disease, diabetes, arthritis, dementia, and Alzheimer's, a number of autoimmune diseases, all these other things. Listen, I went to medical school. I spent, 4 years memorizing thick textbooks of every single disease has been discovered in over 4,000 years of Western medicine. The one thing they never taught us actually how to do, that I actually formed the body of my work, is that not so as a doctor, you're trained to ask, well, okay, what causes the disease? What's going on with the disease? But I wound up actually building my career asking the question, why don't we get sick more often? Why don't we get sick more often, right? So that's the way of answering the question, what is health? If health is what? If you ask most people, health is the absence of disease. I'm not sick. How do you know you're healthy? Because I'm not sick. Well, okay, so then what is health? Not being sick? That's not a very satisfactory answer. And if you're really operationalizing it, you can't operationalize a negative. You can't do something about the absence of something else, right? Really, it kind of twists your mind when you think about that. So I started asking, well, what is health? Well, health, if it's not the absence or not only the absence of disease, what is it the result of? Our health, is what my research has shown, is a result of our body's hardwired health defense systems that we're born with. They formed in the womb. When we were developing in the uterus, in our mom's uterus, we were forming these health defense systems that stay with us from the time we're born to our very last breath. Even when you're dying, your health defenses are still trying to resist disease. So now, turn it right back to that question. How come we don't get sick more often? It leads your mind to go think something else. Like, yeah, that's a really good question. Let me throw a couple of kind of like examples of why that question matters. So we know cigarette smoke causes lung cancer. And how many of us has breathed cigarette smoke coming out of a bar or a restaurant or a bus stop, and that cigarette smoke went into our lungs. And how come we didn't develop lung cancer ourselves, right? I mean, it's not like, oh yeah, the smoker's going to develop it, but how come we didn't? We breathed it. When you're actually out at the beach, we know that bright sunshine, sunlight, ultraviolet radiation could cause skin cancer. So almost all of us have gone out and laid out in the sun. Our skin darkens, our pigment darkens, we get a tan. Now, how come we didn't get skin cancer? I mean, yeah, sure, people that burn do get skin cancer. That's an explanation. But how come the rest of us didn't get that skin cancer? That wound up becoming the body of my work. And one of the things that I wrote about in my book, Eat to Beat Disease, is, and this is the subtitle of the book, the new science of how your body defends itself. Okay, and how do we do this? We do this with 5 health defense systems. It's probably more than 5, but I'll tell you, 5 is what keeps us alive. And it's angiogenesis, our circulation keeps us alive. Without a good, healthy circulation, we die, because our blood vessel network, we talked about endothelial cells, actually bring oxygen and nutrients to every single cell and organ of our body. So we got to keep that in perfect shape, and foods can boost that. Number 2, our stem cells. Now, when we were only an egg plus sperm and fertilized into an ovum and started to develop into, this early cluster of living cells, we were all made out of stem cells. And as we got turned into a human, a human being, looked like an arm and a leg, a couple of eyes, and we were born, we kept some of those stem cells around. Where are they? They're in our skin. They're in our bone marrow. They're even in our hearts and our brains, we now figured out. And the fact is that when we're adults, those stem cells defend us against disease because they repair damaged organs. We don't even know the damage that goes on in our organs, and these invisibly come out, and behind, while we're sleeping, they're coming out, and they're actually repairing, our damaged goods. Our microbiome, which we started talking about already, defends our health. Our DNA, and everybody thinks about DNA as our genetic code. It's not like it's a Rosetta Stone and you just kind of read through the code. No, man, our DNA is active. It's dynamic. It's changing. You talked about the viral integration in the DNA. Our DNA is about as alive as you can think about it, like an octopus, in an aquarium. It's doing all kinds of things. And one of the things it's doing is dividing, replacing itself. But our DNA makes 10,000 mistakes every single day in the typical human body, and each of those mistakes can lead to a cancer. So how come we don't develop cancer all the time? Because our DNA fixes these mistakes. It's got its own spell check. It can actually look for the typos and fix them automatically. It's got its own, when there's big damage, like not just single letters that are misspelled, not just misspellings, but big chunks that are damaged. Think about that the last time you went out and got really burned in your skin. And I'm not talking about sunburn now. I'm talking about like a candle burn, an oil burn, something in the kitchen maybe. Now think of all the mutations that occurred with that injury. Okay. Well, guess what? It knows how to repair those potholes. It can fix it. And as we age, our DNA naturally is at risk for more damaging because the telomeres that protect the caps of our DNA burn down like the candle itself. I call it a life fuse. When that fuse burns down, you're right at the powder keg. And bottom line is that we can actually slow down that burning with food and fix the DNA with food. And then back to home base, what we just talked about is our immune system. It turns out our immune system is our final defense system that I wrote about. Angiogenesis, stem cells, microbiome, DNA, and immunity. These are 5 legs of the stool of our health. We sit on this. This is what props us up every single day that keeps us from getting sick more often.
Powerful. This is so good. So powerful. So I got to ask you about a couple of things before we dive into what are some of the things that we can help to do to kind of support our health defense systems. I want to ask you about vascular endothelial growth factor, aka VEGF. How does this might be a new term for a lot of folks, but when talking about the endothelial component of this, it just really got my wheels turning and how this might be playing a role here. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So first of all, VEGF sounds like a superpower, right? Like, a Marvel universe, right? And it's like, so, and actually it is kind of one of the body's natural super healing proteins. So we got a lot of proteins in our body, and we haven't researched them all, but we know some of them are super important, like insulin's really important, thyroid hormone. These are all proteins. VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor, is one of the more recent discoveries. Now, I got to confess something, which is I was working in the lab that first discovered VEGF. And this was, man, like so many years ago, I don't even want to talk about it, but we were hunting for this invisible factor that we knew if we had blood vessels growing in a plastic dish, if there was a drop of this substance X that was in there, that's how we thought about it. We knew that the moment that drop hit it, and it would be like, imagine a video of this, like a drop coming down, hitting the water, causing that ripple effect. And once that drop got in there, blood vessels would be activated, and a single blood vessel would start to branch out, sprout. You'd get a whole spider web that would come out of a single drop of this VEGF. It took time to figure it out, but here's what it is. It is the body's natural blood vessel growing factor. Vascular endothelium are the cells lining blood vessels. This is the growth factor that causes them, it tells them, hey, wake up, dudes, time to go to work. Okay, it is like that, that alarm in the morning. That's what VEGF is, and it gives very specific instructions. It doesn't just wake them up; it actually tells them exactly what to do, and they sprout, they divide, they extend, they form arcades, beautiful arcades, and they start from thick blood vessels down to skinny ones. The thick ones, we have the biggest blood vessel in our body is called the aorta. It's the big one that pumps blood. We got two big ones in our neck, carotid arteries, But the amazing ones are the ones that are harder to see. They're smaller than a human hair, okay? And we have 19 billion of those things. And those are actually what bleeds when we cut ourselves, even a paper cut. You're not cutting a big artery. You're not jetting blood out. But that blood that comes up when you get a paper cut, that's because you cut through some of those 19 billion capillaries. That's actually what keeps us alive. So VEGF is a great thing until it's a bad thing. And it can be a bad thing in some diseases like cancer, those mutations that our body can't repair enough, which is why we want to eat foods that can help our body protect the good blood vessels and not the bad ones. When cancers actually start without a blood supply because of mutations, they can't grow bigger than the head of a ballpoint pen. Let me see if I can see a ballpoint pen around here. I can show just how big it is. Well, this isn't really a ballpoint pen, but you can kind of see this is a pen. That little tip there, that little nub, that's it. That's how big a cancer can get without oxygen. But a few of these cancer cells can figure out how to hijack our vascular system and selfishly grow blood vessels to it, right? It's like a bank robber going in there to bust out some cash. Well, how does a cancer do this? It copy pastes VEGF. It learns how to actually make the healing factor, and instead of healing, it drops some of that good stuff to wake up the vascular endothelial cells, the blood vessels, and the vessels are tricked into feeding the cancer instead. And the moment that blood vessels touch that little nub that couldn't grow without a blood supply, we've done research to show once angiogenesis or blood vessels touch a tumor, a tiny little tumor can grow 16,000 times in size in 2 weeks. So this is the trigger for tumor growth. Without angiogenesis, without VEGF, tumors are essentially harmless.
Oh my goodness, this is fascinating. The body is so amazing, and there's so many different things going on. So not only is your body repairing, spell checking DNA mistakes and doing processes to, prevent angiogenesis to cancer cells, for example, and, defending your body against novel viruses, and the list goes on and on. It's all of these multifaceted roles, But in this role specifically, I would imagine that somebody with the severe COVID infection, for example, that their VEGF would probably shooting up pretty high, would be kind of another indicator that something's going on. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not aware yet that we've actually studied levels, circulating levels of VEGF in people with COVID. And in fact, you've actually sparked a new research idea, because we should be doing this, Shawn. We will document on your podcast. This is where this idea began, and we'll have to acknowledge it if it turns out into a research, anything positive out of the research study. But I will tell you, we're still grappling with acute COVID infection. Obviously, we're trying to get vaccinated so we can prevent getting the COVID. But the other problem that's occurring is long COVID, or people who have gotten the infection and they seem like their lungs have gotten better, but then months later they wind up having all these same bizarre things all over again. Head brain fog and smelling problems and racing heart, all kinds of muscle skeletal weaknesses, and we know that there's chronic inflammation. We know there's vascular damage. I've been studying that. And I'm wondering, maybe a biomarker for the damage actually would be high levels of circulating VEGF, because inflammation, not only cancer, but inflammation also triggers VEGF to come out. Because usually, and think about it, we started talking about VEGF as a good guy. It is. You need it to build all the muscles. You need it to build your heart. You need it to keep your circulation good. But in the case of disease, the body responds and sometimes gets tricked, and inflammation can cause a lot of VEGF to go out, which can also, cause chaos. Good idea.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. You know what? I just thought of something else, because in speaking about folks who come down with a severe case of this, and then they recover and they're kind of trying to battle back. I know there's so many different things that people just aren't aware of that can assist in that, because again, we're talking about healing vessels, blood vessels. We're talking about healing capillaries. This is where the real kind of mess is taking place and the body's trying to fix. What do you think about something like hyperbaric oxygen, for example, to aid in that?
I've been thinking about this, because I'm working with multiple groups now, trying to figure out how to help people who have survived COVID, but they're really struggling. And in some of the work I've done, we've been able to document literally people who are 6-9 months out of COVID. They're missing blood vessels, sometimes up to 50 or even 80% of their microcirculation. Those tiny little blood vessels in their lungs are missing, probably damaged by the virus itself. And how do you grow them back? Well, one of the things I've been thinking about is we need to heal up that injury caused by the virus, by COVID. And one of the things that we might be able to tear a page from the playbook of is wound healing. So hyperbaric oxygen is one of the tools that we use to be able to help people with chronic wounds that are not healing fast enough and they're at risk, to really prompt them to stimulate new blood vessel growth. And guess what hyperbaric does? Hyperbaric oxygen stimulates VEGF. It stimulates the superhero growth factor, the protein that grows new blood vessels. So I'm going to score 2 for you, because that's another way that might correlate with that growth factor as a biomarker in people who are actually trying to recover from long COVID, if we actually get hyperbaric on them.
When you put me in the study references, make sure to put that handsome guy for the Model Health Show, Shawn Stevenson.
Well, listen, I think you should be a co-author on it. I'll make you read the manuscript.
Absolutely. So now I think it's a good point for us to dive in and share some of the things that you shared with me that was just like so eye-opening and refreshing. But proactively, what can we do? Because for me, and you know this about me as well, and everybody listening, one of my fundamental principles, one of the big tenets that I'm trying to integrate into our culture is the fact that our bodies are literally made from the food that we eat, and also the ability to run processes is all dependent upon food. When we're talking about blood vessels, they're made from food. They're made from your food, the things you're consuming with, water, oxygen you're breathing. It's creating the cells themselves. This stuff matters so much, and it hasn't been a big part of the conversation. And we can just add some things in here, some health defense systems to be more on the offense, And so you shared some things with me as far as food that was just So powerful. And let's talk about some of those right now. What are some of the foods that we can be targeting and eating and integrating to help us to build up some more resistance and resilience during this time right now?
Well, listen, I mean, I think that if our body's health defenses are strong, that old adage of the best offense is a strong defense is really the lead that we should be all thinking about, every single one of us, whether you get the vaccine or not, whether you've had COVID or not, whether you're just, kind of going about your way, doesn't matter your belief system. You got to believe in yourself, regardless of your philosophy. Your body can never lie to you, which means that when your body's not, when you don't believe in your body, by the way, like ultimately the biggest religion that we can have, all of us, is really believing in ourselves and what we're actually made out of. And so that core, our cellular integrity and our ability to be able to defend it is in fact, what I think you were talking about. So what are some of the things that we can do, pandemic or not, but especially during a pandemic, that we can actually fortify our defenses? I'm going to come to the immune system at the very end. But because we were just talking about some of the damage that can occur when you get COVID in the lung and damaging blood vessels, or even in long COVID, by the way, people with who have survived COVID but having these damages, they call themselves long haulers, like truckers that are driving across the country. Man, after 48 hours, still driving, still having this problem with COVID. That's what they call themselves. Long COVID is what the British were calling this because they, English people like to put nice titles on things as much as possible. But the NIH recently created an official scientific and medical title for it. They call it PASC or PASC. Now, and that stands for post-acute, meaning after you've already had, sequelae, meaning consequences of, what you had to deal with afterwards, COVID-19. So post-acute sequelae of COVID, PASC, is basically what some of these people are having. And because I told you we just had vascular damage, let's start with what we can do to protect our blood vessels, right? Good circulation, probably more resistant to virus infection, but definitely if it's been damaged, you want to be able to heal that baby up. So what are the things that can actually help us have a better vascular health defense system? We know that fruits and vegetables are actually healthy for us. And by the way, I don't know if you saw this, recently there was a major study that came out, looked at 2 million people and showed that exactly how many servings of fruits and vegetables you should have for optimal health. Turns out to be 2 servings of fruits per day and 3 servings of vegetables a day is actually what they just studied real world people and figured out that actually seems to optimize health. So what are some things about fruits? Because I actually really like fruits. It turns out that there is a natural substance called ursolic acid, and ursolic acid tends to be found in fruit skin. So in the fall, when I actually eat fruit, I love to eat the skin. It's got a lot of fiber in it, extra micronutrients. And by the way, this would be the kind of the situation where I would tell people, if you're going to have the fruit skin, you probably want to have organic or organic-like grown, because you don't want to have that pesticides on it. You can't scrub that off very easily. But ursolic acid actually stimulates, guess what? VEGF in your body to help grow blood vessels. So, this is like a whole story we're telling in this podcast. Like every point actually connects to another point, and that's really what health is all about. Fruit skins. Now, listen, you want to eat some fruit skins. You can eat a whole apple, and you can get a fair amount of fruit skin. But I'll give you your viewers and listeners a super simple tip of how to eat a lot of fruit skin. Create a trail mix with good healthy nuts, but have dried fruits in it. Dried cherries, dried cranberries, dried blueberries, dried apricots. That's a way of shrinking down a pretty big mass of fruit into tiny little things you can just pop. You can throw that down the hatch and get a lot of that fruit skin. So that would be one example of how we can do it. Barley is another example of a food that actually has this bioactive in it that actually stimulates angiogenesis. And mushrooms also have beta-D-glucan that can also help groom our vascular endothelium, those cells around our blood vessels, to keep it healthy.
Oh, that's perfect. So this is addressing one particular area, and it's incredibly insightful. And my son Jordan, he's a personal trainer now. He's creating his own programs, helping people, working with kids. It's amazing. One of the things that he's always doing on social media is showing people the unique ways that you can eat fruit. So he's like eating the whole kiwi, which you would think just to peel off that kind of fuzzy skin. But, this is another thing that you could take advantage of.
Yeah, that's right. There's all kinds of little tips. One of the things I love about food, so I always tell people I'm not one of these doctors that rejects modern medicine, and I somehow got on the veggie craze. So I stand up on a podium and wave a kale leaf. I'm not one of those guys. Actually, I helped to develop biotech drugs, so I'm a big believer in the right medicine for the right person at the right time. That's important, but the missing tool in the toolbox is our diet and our food. When it comes to food, I tell people I actually love food. I wouldn't say I love eating. Like I'm not, I don't love stuff in my face, but I love food. I love food, Shawn, because it tells us something. Everybody's got a connection to food. It's intimate. Food tells us something about our upbringing, how we grew up, what we remember, our earliest memories with our families, our moms, our kitchens we grew up in, the smells when we were coming back from school. It tells us something about our families, our communities, our culture. And so everybody has this very complicated, very personal, intimate connection with food. And that's a great thing about it, is that you can always explore something new about how to eat foods. And if you're someone who's like me, curious about cultures, you can go out and explore new cultures. It's like, and in today's digital world, you can pick up a food that you don't know much about. Like, I'll give you one, bitter melon. The heck is a bitter melon? Well, it's a Southeast Asian, it's kind of like a cucumber. It's a little hairy. It's got grooves in it. And if you were to eat it and taste it, and you don't know how to prepare it, man, is that thing bitter. But if you want to actually skin it, seed it, chop it up, put it in some vegetable stock, slowly simmer it to soften up the melon, okay? And then cook it with some fish or some chicken, and that animal protein complements the bitterness, and cooking it mellows the whole thing out. Guess what that turns out to do? It actually stimulates your stem cells, protects your DNA, and boosts your immunity at the same time. And guess what? Bitter melon has always been a traditional medicinal food in Southeast Asia. Like, man, I love that kind of stuff. And you can go on YouTube and search bitter melon recipe, and you can watch somebody cook it for you.
So good. Yeah, I haven't thought about bitter melon in quite some time. That's one of those foods that also has some benefit with insulin resistance, for example.
Exactly.
That's the thing too, is like, it's typically not just one thing that a food is good for, because your body is not compartmentalized. If it's good for one thing, it's probably good for a lot of other things. You said something to me the other day when we were talking about broccoli sprouts that really tripped me out. Can you share that?
Yeah, well, so another immune system, defense system that we want to boost these times is our immune system. And so one of the first things I did at the beginning of the pandemic was go back to my playbook to say, okay, so what can actually amp up that front line of defense, right? We're talking about those sentries, that passport control that can prevent viruses from coming in. Well, here's what I did. I figured out, well, we didn't have a vaccine at the time, but I wanted to know what actually can naturally kind of not vaccinate yourself, but to ramp up those natural defenses. And it turns out that sulforaphanes, which are a class of chemical that taste a little sulfury, by the way, that's what kale, broccoli, cauliflower, they've got a lot of that sulfury kind of a little taste to it, actually. It's kind of the part of the palate, let's say, a palate stimulator. That broccoli, actually adult broccoli, the treetops and the trunks, they have a lot of it. And I thought, that's really cool, because I had done research looking at the biological properties of broccoli, and we tested the treetops versus the stems, and we found the treetops are very active. We found that there was twice as much activity in the stem. So I thought, well, okay, maybe I should be eating some broccoli stem. But then I started to take a look further, and I was blown away by something, Shawn, which is that as much as broccoli stems have of these sulforaphanes, those are grown-up broccolis, that baby broccolis, broccoli sprouts, we're talking about 3 to 4 day old broccoli. You can see them in the markets now, like just a regular supermarket. If you go to the sprouts section, I remember they used to have just only like bean sprouts. Now they got all kinds of sprouts, alfalfa, broccoli. The broccoli sprouts are just growing up. They're 3 to 4 days old. You buy them up, and you got to kind of peel them apart. They're kind of like it's like turf, like astroturf a little bit. Peel them apart, wash them up, and you eat them. They don't taste like broccoli. Actually, they taste nutty, which I love. I love a little kind of nutty flavor. It's unexpected, honestly. And you can sprinkle on almost any food that you're actually preparing. It makes it taste a little bit better. But here's the crazy thing. The sulforaphanes that are in adult broccoli, the baby ones have 100 times the concentration. It's almost like the broccoli was born with all the sulforaphanes it's ever going to have. All right, and then a little tiny little sprout. And as it grows up and extends and turns into this gigantic thing, right? Think Jolly Green Giant, right? It's big. It distributes all the broccoli, the sulforaphanes that started in the entire body of the broccoli. So broccoli sprouts have a lot of sulforaphanes, and then here's really the kind of the punchline. Turns out research has been done showing that if you drink a shake made out of broccoli sprouts, a couple of shakes actually a day, and just a cup of broccoli sprouts put into a shake, and then you get actually a flu vaccine. So this isn't COVID. This is just regular old, garden variety flu vaccine, which everybody should get. And you also drink the broccoli sprout shake. The broccoli sprouts will amp up your body's response to a vaccine 22 times. So you wind up going kind of like ordinary vaccine responder to super soldier yourself. You just like really amp your defenses. And when they actually studied in these people, these are young people, healthy people, their T cells and natural killer cells, they were amped up beyond, and more defense cells, immune cells, and more killing power within each of those cells against the virus. And then when they actually swabbed to look for viruses, right? Like everybody was like, oh my God, not the COVID swab in your nose. But when you do research, you actually do swabs, just look for influenza, just a regular flu virus. We don't have to go deep, just go even in a regular nose. People who are on a placebo drink, so this is a placebo-controlled study, still had flu virus in their nose, but in the broccoli drinkers, shake drinkers who got the vaccine, 0, Z. And so this is sort of like the proof of concept of just how powerful Mother Nature is, and our body can respond to it in equally powerful ways.
Incredible. All right, I know we're getting tight on time here, but I would love if you could share with these health defense systems. There's 5 that we need to target, and there's a lot more that you can learn from Dr. Lee, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But if there's maybe 1 or 2 more foods that we need to target right now to help with our body's defense systems.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, let's go through 5. Okay, so angiogenesis, we talked about fruit peel to help endothelial cells stay healthy. Immune system, we talked about broccoli sprouts. Let's talk about regeneration, stem cells. It turns out that cacao, dark chocolate, the stuff, not the sweet stuff, the stuff that's actually kind of slightly bitter, comes from Mother Nature, comes from a pod, actually can double the number of stem cells in your bloodstream if you have the equivalent of dark chocolate, like 80% or higher. So it's pretty bitter. I actually like it. And you have it as hot chocolate twice a day. Research has shown you can take people with cardiovascular disease, impaired blood flow, and you can drink that and it'll mobilize your stem cells. You can actually measure it with a blood test, right? Like the kind of blood test you go to your doctor's office. Instead of looking for the usual suspects in a blood test you look for stem cells. You can double the number of stem cells in your body by just drinking dark cocoa, 80% or higher, for 30 days. And then you double the body's ability to healthy your blood vessels because they've been repaired, regenerated. That's stem cells, all right? Now, that did that for your blood vessels. Think about what it did for your brain. Think about what it did for your heart. Think about what your kidney, your liver, and by the way, your skin and your hair and all that other kind of stuff, important. So that's the third defense system. Let's talk about microbiome, something that people might not have expected because All right, look, I mean, if I were to meet expectations, what am I going to say about the microbiome? Have some fermented foods. Go ahead and have some yogurt, sauerkraut, kimchi, all that kind of stuff. Absolutely do that. But what about kiwi? What if I told you, because you talked about kiwi earlier, made me think about it. Now, what if I told you that kiwi is a great source of vitamin C, which is good for your immunity and lowering inflammation, but it's got a lot of fiber in it, and a surprising amount of fiber in just the green stuff. If you eat the skin, it's got a ton of fiber, but just the green stuff actually has a lot of fiber. You can taste it when you're eating a kiwi. If you actually chew it, you can taste the fiber, although it kind of goes down really easily. Turns out eating just one kiwi a day will quickly start to change the number of healthy gut bacteria in your body. And it only takes like 24 hours to cause that benefit. And so this is a quick, I wouldn't call it a fix, but it is a quick way of getting your gut to actually repair itself. And so microbiome, kiwi. Now let's go for DNA repair, because I love the idea of DNA, of fixing your DNA, your like own gene therapy. Here's something that most people will take them like by surprise. There's a lot of things, like antioxidants, do all that kind of stuff. What if I told you that sunflower seeds can actually slow down the degradation of your telomeres? So these are the life fuse, that thing that protects your DNA, okay, that burns down slowly as we get older, and you want to slow that burn down. Okay, who wants to get older? We do all we want to age great. And we want to make sure as we're aging, our DNA is not burning down too fast. What are things that happen as we age and our DNA gets shorter? Our hair starts to fall out, starts to turn gray, our skin gets wrinkly, our heart function gets less vibrant and powerful as before, so we tend towards heart failure. Our eyesight goes down. Our retina, the neuroretina, which receives light, transmits to our brain, starts to fade. What's the common denominator of aging in all of those cell types? Is our telomeres are getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. Remember that powder keg I was telling you about? When you get down to the powder keg, man, game over, right? You can't run away from that blast far enough. And so basically what you want to do is slow that fuse down. Turns out that sunflower seeds can actually naturally slow down telomere degradation. And so that's another one. So 5 health defense systems. I'm trying to see if I can remember this quickly. Angiogenesis, dried fruit, regeneration stem cells, dark chocolate, microbiome, kiwi, DNA, sunflower seeds, immunity, broccoli sprouts. Listen, I write about more than 200 different foods, but I was trying to bring up some stuff that most people might not have thought about for this podcast.
So many good ones, and also throwing in here some insights about bitter melon and VEGF throughout the episode. So many incredible things. And Dr. Lee actually has a deep dive into all of these different health defense systems that people can get access to. And number one, this is something coming from a researcher, scientist like Dr. Lee. This is something to share with our friends and families, something to share with our parents right now, in particular our grandparents, who, again, when we talk about this level of susceptibility, really, what are the things that we can do to address all 5 of those health defense systems? And you have an incredible new online course that you put together. Can you let everybody know about that and also how they can get access to it?
Yeah, well, listen, when I wrote my book, Eat to Beat Disease, I never set out to create an online course. But what happened was I got hundreds and then thousands and then tens of thousands of people contacting me, asking me for more information. And, my book is pretty thick, Eat to Beat Disease, but you can only put so much into a book. And so what I decided that I needed to be able to do is to take the information, the research I did, and I'm still doing, that went into writing the book, and figure out a way to share that in a scalable way. And as of last week, I was counting, like on a typical week, how many places people contact me from. Last week, I had people from 15 different countries coming at me, asking me for lots of questions about food and health. And so I decided to create an online course. By the way, so I don't just write books and do online courses and do podcasts. I'm a researcher. I'm a physician. I'm trying to do pandemic research and COVID research. I'm doing this because I really felt like it was I need to be able to share this information out. So I created an Eat to Beat disease online course. It's a 4-week program. It's got weekly videos. It's got a workbook I developed to really engage people with tons of lists of foods. One of the things that I really I believe in seriously is actually to create live time with me, office hours. I call it because I used to teach in colleges and high schools and in medical schools. So I have weekly office hours with me where people can actually interact and ask me questions. And I have something called Quans, Qans, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Questions and answers, where people can ask me questions, I answer them. And so I basically am so grateful, Shawn, that you and I share this common passion about getting information out that most people might not know, but everybody can use. So I wanted to offer your model health community a special offer. You can find my course through my website, drwilliamlee.com, drwilliamlee.com, and enter a coupon code called Model Health, all in capitals, Model Health, one word, all caps at checkout, and a special offer for your community. But that's actually how you find me, at drwilliamlee.com, Model Health. I'm on Instagram. And the key for me is really sharing this information. I am so grateful that, we can actually have offline conversations, which then sparks this idea for us to peel off, some of the tips of the iceberg that we have to share with your group. So thank you for that.
Oh, it's my pleasure. This has been amazing, Dr. Lee. I always love talking with you. Can't wait to do so much more in the future. We've talked about getting into some education programs to really help to shift the way that our medical system is even being built and educated, so that we can really focus on getting our citizens healthier, not just doing things to Band-Aid treat symptoms, but to really work on overall health. And thank you so much earlier asking that question, what is health? And coming from that place, and I haven't shared this with you before, but that's one of the things that really sparked this aspect of my career in this way, is asking, what can I do to become healthy? When I was battling with the so-called incurable condition I was dealing with, this arthritic condition when I was just a kid, and asking, because, I've got this diagnosis, but what can I do to get healthy? What does that look like? And it just really shifts our direction and our focus. So I appreciate you so much for all the good work that you're doing. Again, can you let everybody know where they can check you out online? Give that website name again, and also that code.
Yeah, so you can come find me and learn more about me, and sign up and get all kinds of free information that I regularly give out, like on a weekly basis, at my website, Dr. William Lee, drwilliamlee.com, and sign up for my Eat to Beat disease online course. It's a 4-week course. I run it throughout the year, and enter for a special really discount I'm giving just to the model health community. Enter in the coupon code Model Health, one word, all in caps. And I hope to see you in the course, because then you'll actually meet me live.
Awesome. Dr. Lee, again, I appreciate you so much for coming on and hanging out with us.
Thank you, Shawn. My pleasure.
Dr. William Lee, everybody. Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here to up-level your health today. Remove the cause of the disease. We have to remove the cause first. So what is contributing to the degradation of our microbiome? This dysfunction with our microbiome is driving the obesity epidemic.